All right, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I'd like to start off by saying welcome, everybody. We're glad that you joined us today to celebrate and learn from some of the creative ways that Ontario's literacy and basic skills programs evolved in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. To say there have been a lot of changes over the past year would be an understatement, and we're grateful to all of the programs that agreed to share what they've learned in the process. I'm Summer Burton. I'll be your host today. Before I begin, I want to let you know that we are recording this session so we can share it with those who aren't able to attend. It will be posted on the Quill website, and I'll be sharing the link with you in a minute. We'd like to take a moment to acknowledge Employment Ontario and the Ministry of Labour, Training and Skills Development. The research we're sharing with you today was made possible through funding by the ministry, and we appreciate their ongoing support. With that said, the views expressed in today's presentation are those of the researchers and the programs we spoke to, and do not necessarily reflect those of the province. The Government of Ontario and its agencies are in no way bound by the recommendations that we're sharing today. And speaking of the recommendations we're sharing today, let's take a look at our agenda. We'll start by telling you a bit about the project that inspired today's presentation. And then we'll share tips, tricks, and a whole lot of information learned through experience on subjects that include marketing your program during a pandemic, keeping the lines of communication open when your office is closed, and modifying the intake process so you can still get what you need from clients. We'll share a lot of information about supporting learners during these strange times, including what programs have done to identify learner needs, help their learners access technology and internet service, and support their learning, both in person and online. We'll share some of the helpful platforms and programs they've used, and talk about how they've assessed learner progress too. We'll also get into some of the learning over the last year in terms of supporting staff and volunteers, as well as program administration. Finally, with an eye on the future, we'll look at getting ready to return to in-person delivery and what we can do now to prepare for possible learning disruptions in the future. We welcome you to use the chat to ask questions throughout today's presentation. In fact, one question that I know people will already have is if they can get a copy of the slides from today. And yes, you can. We'll go ahead and put them in the chat shortly. It's actually Anne-Marie who's going to be posting those to chat because she's been kind enough to support me on today's webinar. So I want to acknowledge her and send her my thanks. Anne-Marie will be keeping her eye on the chat, and I'll check in with her a couple of times during the session to see if anything urgent's popped up. We'll also review and discuss any of your comments or questions at the end of the session as well. We hope you'll take the opportunity to share any of your own best practices with others on the call. Jennifer Hewitt was the researcher for this project, which was focused on surveying and interviewing the staff at adult literacy programs and networks across Ontario. Executive directors, program managers, support staff, program coordinators, literacy practitioners, and volunteer tutors from community-based, school board-based, and college-based literacy programs all provided input through the completion of 39 surveys and 23 interviews. That's a lot of people sharing a lot of information from a lot of different perspectives. These programs shared adaptations they'd made to every area of their operations, including administration, marketing, intake processes, delivery, learning resources and technology, assessments, and staff support. Everyone's journey has been different this year, depending on how they delivered services prior to the pandemic, and whether or not they were located on their own or inside another building or organization, their own access to and understanding of technology, the level of the learners they served, and more. So while there are differences, there are also key similarities, excellent practices and resources that were mentioned again and again during Jennifer's research, and we're happy to share them with you today. Now, we won't be able to cover absolutely every suggestion and tip shared by literacy programs in today's webinar. I think if we did, we'd probably spend most of the rest of today together. That said, the full research report called Best Practices in Adult Literacy Program Delivery During the COVID-19 Pandemic is available on the Quill website. The link is appearing on your screen now and will be shared in our chat as well. When you visit the site, you'll also notice several tip sheets that have been created to help share some key best practices and sort of themes. They include marketing, engaging volunteers, helping learners access technology, and more. I'll be referencing them several times throughout today's presentation as well. Now, Jennifer shared with us just how impressed she was by the lengths that literacy program management, practitioners, staff, and volunteers have gone to in an effort to keep serving learners during these challenging times. She said that if she could give each of you a medal, she would, but in her place, we'll say a big thank you, not only for your ongoing commitment to learner success, but also agreeing to share your time and expertise to help others in the literacy field navigate these challenging times. Sorry, just letting some more people in. So we're going to start today with what's often the beginning of the journey for a learner, finding out that literacy programs exist in the first place and that they can help them achieve their goals. With so many programs and services closed, some of the traditional sources for learner referrals dried up completely. And with marketing budgets somewhere between limited and non-existent, most programs needed to get creative to get the word out. Agencies that were able to shift their marketing suggested several ways that others could follow their lead. Making sure that your referral partners know you're still able to offer services is a good place to start. So programs suggested attending virtual community meetings to spread the word. Some programs also began reaching out to organizations they wouldn't normally have a referral relationship with to see how they could work together. Every email sent to both those current and new contacts can be used as a marketing opportunity by expanding your email signature. Some programs embedded posters for upcoming classes or a click here to learn more graphic within every email, getting the word out without much extra effort. With fewer learners being referred, some programs faced having to cancel group sessions that needed a minimum number of attendees to run. They found success, however, by offering short-term targeted training programs focused on a specific skill, like digital literacy, and marketing it to an audience that would benefit from that specific skill. Programs looked hard at what their strengths were and played to them. If they had a deep understanding of the local labor market, they promoted short-term employment-focused training marketed to people displaced from their jobs due to COVID-19. Programs that reached out to others to discuss offering a shared program with learners or clients from both agencies coming together to form a single cohort also reported greater success. Looking for a new audience for literacy upgrading was also a win. People suddenly found themselves with some time on their hands, and those in precarious work situations in particular were looking for stability in these unprecedented times. Programs went online across several platforms like Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to seek out people who were already comfortable navigating an online world and who may now have the time and motivation to upgrade their skills from home. Some of these folks may never have considered in-person programming, even if it weren't a pandemic, either because of their schedules or a lack of comfort with face-to-face contact. So a new audience of possible learners opened up. That said, navigating and creating material for social media is not everyone's strength. So to help spread the word online, programs that used it suggested not just creating marketing content, but sharing it with other programs via email, so they can just copy paste or upload it easily to their own websites and online platforms. And speaking of websites, making sure that it's up to date with information about how the pandemic is affecting your service is important. As we've seen over the last year, things can change from yellow to red to green to gray and back again quickly. So frequent "here's how we're doing things now" updates on your website are considered pretty important. Of course, not everyone is actually going to go to your website. And as we know, not everyone's comfortable navigating online pretty much at all. So, keeping in mind that one of the most successful marketing strategies has always been go to where your audience is, some programs reported success by taking their marketing offline altogether and to the streets, literally. Posters and signs in windows, banners hung facing bus stops, even flags with contact information flying from the building. One program pointed out the value of marketing at a local grocery store, given that it's the one place that almost everyone in the community will visit, even during a pandemic. They drew attention by renting window space at the grocery store and advertising help with digital literacy, including how to place an online order for your groceries. Excellent marketing technique. Knowing that marketing and fundraising are often tied together, we'll mention here that there are challenges associated with reaching your audience that impact donations too. Most fundraising done by literacy programs is based on in-person events, walks, spelling bees, Scrabble tournaments, or dinners, none of which obviously are possible in a lockdown. One agency suggested hosting online cooking classes as an alternative, charging a fee for attendees, and arranging a chef to host who's willing to provide their expertise at a discount or for free. More ideas are really needed in this area, so we welcome you to start popping your fundraising suggestions in the chat now. I'll come back and check on what you've suggested in a bit. Before we move on though, this is a heads up that there is a tip sheet available that's focused entirely on marketing. So make sure that if getting the word out about your program is a focus, you look for additional suggestions in that tip sheet. We'll go ahead and share a link to that marketing tip sheet in the chat as well. Once word gets out that your services are available, albeit in a different format than before, people may want to get in touch. This presented a big challenge at the start of the pandemic, especially with programs closing for what we thought was a couple of weeks that turned, for some, into more than a year. Because so few of us had a plan in place for remote communications, many programs had to figure it out through trial and error. And this is what they learned. Programs experimented with setting up call forwarding and remote phone systems that redirect office calls and voicemails to staff at home. Voice over Internet Protocol, or VoIP, services were noted as an effective tool for this kind of setup, especially because most offer extension numbers that can be assigned to staff working both remotely and in office. Other programs set up an alert system connected to their phone line, so any voicemail messages left would trigger an email, letting staff know to dial in and pick up the message. Some systems, like Literacy Link South Central's actually, can email a recorded voicemail message directly to staff, so they can listen to them as audio files on their computers at home. To find out which of these options is available to you, please contact your telephone director or your telephone provider directly. They'll be able to tell you what you can have and what you cannot. Of course, when someone leaves a message, the next step is usually to call them back, and this is where many programs hit another snag. Staff may be uncomfortable calling learners from their personal phone, so systems can be put in place to mask that personal number. Some remote phone systems allow people to call using an app on their cell phone. What displays to anyone receiving that call is the organization's name and phone number. Without a remote phone system, though, staff can also dial *67 before making a call. Doing so means that the call shows up as private or blocked on the recipient's caller ID. The only caution we have is that some people will not pick up calls that show up this way because they do not know who's on the other end. One suggestion that we can share is letting learners know either by email or text when you're going to call so that it encourages them to actually answer their phone. And speaking of texting, because texting has become the first choice for communication by a lot of learners, programs found that setting up a way to text learners was a big win. If purchasing an inexpensive phone with a text plan isn't within reach, apps like Text Now, Text Me, and text-free, they all sound alike, that send texts from a fake burner number are a popular choice. When making a choice between apps, do remember to read user reviews to find out which one might be the best fit for your needs. Establishing a system to get mail deliveries was also important to consider. If the office mailbox wasn't accessible, and several were not when their offices were inside a larger building, programs suggested contacting Canada Post and having mail forwarded to a staff person's home address instead. Okay, before we move on to the next topic, Anne-Marie, were there any fundraising ideas posted in the chat that we can share?
There are not, Summer. I'm not sure. Maybe people are feeling a little sleepy this morning, but maybe they forgot that we're looking for some fundraising ideas too. I have a couple. I think about online things like photo contests that I've seen as a fundraiser, and I know the bingo thing is a big thing too. So somehow people are doing fundraisers through bingo. So maybe those ideas will get people sort of thinking about what they've seen or been involved in.
Thank you so much, Anne-Marie. And if anybody does have more ideas that Anne-Marie's couple of options there triggered, we'd love for you to pop them in the chat. So near the start of the pandemic, intakes ground to a halt. Well, everything ground to a halt, really. And then slowly programs began the process of enrolling new learners again. The challenges they faced were significant, including how to safely collect personal information, complete learner consent forms, get signatures, and learn about their clients' needs when remote intake means learners may not be able to speak privately and therefore authentically. That lack of face-to-face contact makes it much more difficult to both pick up on body language and nonverbal cues and to accurately assess literacy levels. Over time, many found good ways to safely and effectively gather and store this information. So let's take a look at what they've been doing. While some programs met learners in parking lots or other public spaces and exchanged documents and signatures at a safe distance, many programs did start the move online by creating Google Forms that could be used to collect their learners' basic information, which they then exported to the learner's file. Others gathered this information verbally over the phone and entered it directly into CAMS. Programs worked around the challenge of filling out consent forms in a number of different ways, including sending the consent form to the client in the body of an email and asking them to respond with a yes if they agree. Creating a fillable consent form with a click here if you agree button, which they would send to and then review verbally with the learner before the client was asked to click the button. Displaying the consent form on a shared screen like we're doing now during a virtual meeting with the learner and asking them to either verbally agree or type yes in the chat if they agree. Now note that for both of those to work, the video or the chat needs to be downloaded for later reference. Needs assessments were handled in a very similar way, with some practitioners doing in-depth telephone or video intake sessions, asking both traditional comprehension questions and new questions about how the learner was demonstrating their skills during the pandemic. Assessment forms were also sent by email or snail mail with a request for the learner to fill them out and send them back. Learners were also invited to email a photo or scan of the completed assessment, or even complete the assessment with their camera turned on in a virtual intake meeting, so the practitioner could answer questions and observe their work. In some cases, the types of assessments that programs used weren't allowed to be sent electronically. Camera, for example. New assessments were brought into play, like the skills marker tool, which some of you may know as Essential Skills for Employment and Education, or the EASY assessment. And getting learner signatures was obviously a challenge as well, which programs creatively worked around by mailing forms along with a self-addressed stamped envelopes for learners to sign and return, getting the client's verbal consent to sign on their behalf until such time as the signature could be collected in person, having the learners sign paper copies of forms and submit them electronically as photographs or scans, or even by holding them up to the camera during a video call so they could take a screenshot. And also by using e-signature fields embedded in fillable PDF forms. To make it easier for learners, some programs also created a one-stop shop for any forms that needed to be filled out. A Google Drive or site was a great suggestion made by some of the programs we spoke to. That way, learners could navigate to a single location to download and fill out all of the intake forms that the program needed. Once these forms and signatures were gathered, the issue of how to store them securely became critical. For some programs, the solution lay in an encrypted server that staff could access remotely for storing and accessing learner plans and other confidential information. While that may seem like something out of reach for smaller programs, our researcher Jennifer shared that these servers can be bundled with phone and internet service and can also include technical support, either in person or remotely. When current operating costs are considered, they can be more affordable than you may realize. She welcomes anyone on today's call to contact her for more information about that, and you'll see her email address appear on the screen. It will also pop up in our chat in just a moment. A lot of talking, so I had to take a break for a second. So the programs that we spoke to pointed out that they didn't just need to shift from in-person to online or distance learning. They also had to change what they were offering to meet changing learner needs. More learners needed digital literacy training, that's certainly true, and an understanding of how to find reliable and accurate information about health protocols. They also needed support to help their children be successful in their own remote learning and creative ways to find time to focus on their own learning, despite being quarantined at home with others who needed their attention and support. Many needed reassurance and wellness checks or tips for coping with change, isolation, and anxiety. And these needs sometimes had to take precedence over learning, or at least had to come first in the conversation. As a result of stress, many learners felt unable to commit to anything but short, targeted training sessions. Programs also reported a shift in demographics, as many learners in rural areas or with lower literacy levels dropped away from programs, as they couldn't or wouldn't access online services. And finally, learners working with adult literacy programs often had a very different relationship with work than they had in the past, with many laid off and collecting CERB. For some, this was a great motivator to focus on skills upgrading, while others no longer felt committed to building employability skills because they believed work was out of reach anyway. What different demographic shifts did you notice in your programs? I'd love for you to add some comments to the chat to let us know how you noticed your learners changing. We'll also take a few minutes while you're typing, if anybody has anything to add, to think about how programs that we spoke to handled their changing learner needs. So many started by conducting a digital audit of what resources the learner had access to, both technology and skill-wise. Tracking that information along with each learner's preferred method of communication, the best time to contact them, and the platforms they're comfortable using helped create a framework on which to build a remote learning plan. Let's take a look at why each of those elements was so important to the programs that tracked them. First, staying in touch with learners using their preferred communication method, be it phone, text, email, Canada Post, Facebook Messenger, or WhatsApp, helped learners feel connected, supported, and not like they were being asked to figure out a new way of doing things at a time when stress and personal demands were high. And just so you know, there is a tip sheet chock full of great suggestions and tips available that's focused on communicating effectively with learners. So please take a look at that for more information, and Anne-Marie will be popping a quick link to that tip sheet in the chat. That leads me to another really critical and complex element of working with learners remotely. There is a very good chance that no two of your learners have exactly the same skills, technology, needs, and time. COVID-19 took us from a situation where you could bring a group of learners who, yes, all had different skills and needs into a room at the same time and at least know that they would all be using the same technology. Many programs have Chromebooks or tablets and are comfortable helping their learners navigate using that technology. But when each learner may be using a completely different way of connecting to the internet on devices with different operating systems and capabilities, and some not using technology at all, it can be very difficult to support. At least tracking what each person is doing and using in advance, and being able to group like technology together and consider what may work across multiple platforms, including without the use of technology, has made the work more manageable for program staff. Helping to support learners with such diverse access to resources has provided an unanticipated side benefit. Over the past year, many programs have tried a bunch of different platforms and methods to support learners, which has resulted in a toolbox of formats that clients can now choose from. Depending on their needs, learners may be able to access support through paper-based assignments, having information sent by email or text, worked on collaboratively in an online video call, discussed over the phone, completed online, or downloaded at their convenience from a shared website. Programs told us that when learners were given a choice of the most familiar and comfortable ways of getting support, they were more likely to stay engaged in programming during COVID. Being able to access support in the way that suits them best is particularly helpful for learners trying online learning for the first time, who may need something familiar, in addition to lots of support and encouragement from literacy program staff to make that transition. You know, it's interesting, practitioners who themselves struggled to start using a whole host of new technology are an amazing resource and role model, especially for learners that are new to the online environment. The fact of the matter is, technology can be complicated, and recognizing and talking about the feeling of intimidation that it can inspire can really help learners feel like they're not alone. It's a great opportunity for literacy program staff and learners to navigate that digital journey together. I'm going to pause here for a second and just check in with Anne-Marie to see if we have any particular comments or information to share about changing demographics of your learners.
Okay. Well, just to get back to the fundraiser thing, just to start off with that Joanne said fundraisers I've noticed that are hosted by various nonprofits all seem to have a social engagement component. So virtual cooking class or virtual wine tasting or painting, a real trend not just to virtual, but to social connections. So that was Joanne's comment about that. And Robert said now about trends, loss of lowest level students, I think due to computer illiteracy.
Absolutely.
Heather says, we moved to online only delivery, so we had to refer those to low to no computer skills elsewhere once other agencies were able to reopen.
Thank you for sharing that. It's definitely been an interesting transition for not only our learners, but also our programs.
Lisa said several of our level 1 learners expanded their learning time online because they didn't have to commute to the office. They will likely continue online in some capacity even when we do reopen the office. So interesting to see that there's benefits as well.
Absolutely. I think COVID in so many ways forced our hand and made us try things we may not have been comfortable or willing to try otherwise. Sometimes it's to our benefit.
And Sandra said some meetings one-to-one in the public, like parks, where we could make social distancing possible for lower level learners. Lots of creativity happening and resiliency amongst our programs for sure.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you guys for sharing. We appreciate it. So when discovering that many learners had older or often no devices or no internet, literacy programs worked very creatively to try and help. Sometimes this was through referrals to agencies that could help them access like technology. Places like Renewed Computer Technology, I think a lot of us call it RCT, and local social service agencies, or low-cost internet, like the Government of Canada's Connecting Families program. Staying on top of funding sources is a really big responsibility, but programs also shared what a benefit it can provide to learners, many of whom don't have the resources to find information about computers or internet promotions on their own. Some programs were even able to apply for funding themselves through local foundations or other charities, which they then used to provide learners with technology. Others redirected unused travel funds to provide things like internet sticks or pay internet bills. In a pinch, many programs figured out the few public Wi-Fi locations that were still up and running and directed learners to them, or welcomed learners to their own parking lots to use their office Wi-Fi signal. Many programs also created a process to loan their own devices to learners, and they developed some excellent processes to make things run a bit more smoothly with that, including downloading programs onto the computer or tablet in advance, so learners didn't have to do it themselves. They also included documents and other learning materials on the devices that didn't require internet access to use, or provided them on USB sticks if the learner was using a Chromebook or a laptop. They also worked on installing desktop icons with easy to understand labels so that learners knew how to find material quickly. And they created short videos that demonstrated how to open programs, how to connect to Wi-Fi, and perform basic digital tasks, and preloaded those video files on the tablet or computer. Also, having one contact person, a volunteer or a staff person that learners could reach out to with their computer questions or issues made things a lot smoother for those folks that did loan out devices. And conveniently, we have also put together a tip sheet about that. So please be sure to check it out for more advice on how you can help learners get access to digital technology and internet service. As with the other tip sheets, we will pop a short link to that one in the chat in just a moment. With at least some basic technology and internet in place, the transition to online learning began slowly, both for program staff and for learners. As it developed, assignments and activities were exchanged using similar processes to what I described when talking about intake and assessment forms, often with the help of platforms like Google, whose Forms, Docs, and Drive features became the new classroom for many people. Programs investigated apps to help learners submit documents, and one that kept coming up that we were hearing from programs is called Genius Scan, which was particularly helpful because it allowed the learner to take a photo of handwritten work, convert that photo to a PDF, and email it to the literacy practitioner for feedback. The Genius Sign app even allows learners to create an electronic signature and sign their work before turning it in, which means it could be used for other forms as well. As time passed and literacy programs got more comfortable delivering programming in an online world, several created how-to videos for their learners, experimented with Zoom Whiteboard, Google Jamboard, and Teams Viewer to find comfortable and simple to use learning environments that allowed a good level of interactivity to keep people engaged. As with any time you try new technology, there's some trial and error involved, but some common tips that programs shared for successful program delivery using these platforms included having people turn their cameras and mics off if internet connectivity is an issue. It also helps cut down on sound noise. It's an awful phrase. If connectivity wasn't an issue, then using virtual backgrounds to protect people's privacy when working and learning from home was recommended. You really have to figure out whether or not someone's internet service can handle that, because it does drag it. Using, again, a variety of features and formats to keep learners engaged anytime that people could bring up a Jamboard or a whiteboard and allow interactivity, they found that their learners were much more engaged. They also suggested following a routine with each of their online sessions to help learners know what's expected and anticipate what will happen next. Launching things like polls and surveys, games and quizzes, making part of the lesson play-based was a big win and a personal favorite of mine as well. Many programs also suggested tandem teaching, so having one person facilitate the lesson itself while another attends to support learners with their questions and technology needs. And as you already know, we are mirroring that here today with me doing a lot of talking and Anne-Marie making sure that I can stay on track, which I thank her for. For a full list of the different platforms that programs have been using during COVID-19, including a really helpful chart that compares the top 5 program choices to one another. And I'll tell you those top 5 are Zoom, Google Meet, Google Classroom, MS Teams, and this was a new one to me, Blackboard Collaborate. You can download that full report from today's webinar. It's based on called the Best Practices in Adult Literacy Program Delivery during the COVID-19 pandemic. I trip over that title, unfortunately. We're going to pop a direct link in the chat for you now. Programs also shared some great tips with us about the online resources that they used, suggesting first that programs create a shared list of resources that all staff can add to, sorting them by how they can be used. They also recommend digitizing your program's favorite paper-based resources so they can be used online. Now, this can be a big project and a bit overwhelming if it's not something you've done before. So the programs we spoke with suggested picking a single course subject or type of resource to digitize, and then test it out with a group of learners. Starting small and working with easy-to-use programs like Google Forms can also make the job more manageable. This is where the discussions that can happen around a literacy service planning table can be particularly useful as well. Talk to other programs to find out who has digitized what material and see if you can share material with one another. The need to work with learners online also provides an opportunity to blend learning with Ontario's e-channel programs and use other online resources. Several examples that programs told us they used will appear on your screen in a moment. And once again, for a full list of the online courses and resources programs recommended, please do download that full report. Don't also forget that there are many resources available from your regional literacy support networks and provincial sector and stream support organizations as well. Please contact your network through the Learning Networks of Ontario and organizations like Alpha Plus, la Coalition Ontarienne de Formation des Adultes, COFA, Deaf Literacy Initiative, the Ontario Native Literacy Coalition, Community Literacy of Ontario, the Ontario Association of Adult and Continuing Education School Board Administrators, that's CASBA, and another one I trip over, and the College Sector Council all have great resources that they would be happy to share with you. And I know that that's a lot to remember. I could barely even say it. So don't worry, we've prepared a tip sheet for you with all of that and more. Dozens of different online and distance learning support opportunities are there whenever you want to review this tip sheet. And we'll pop that in the chat. Unfortunately, even with the efforts that programs made to help learners close that digital divide, a large number of learners remain without adequate technology or internet service. And literacy programs worked hard to support their learning journeys as well. They created duplicates of workbooks and activity sheets and dropped them off in mailboxes or on front porches across the province. They sent materials through Canada Post. As one of our attendees mentioned in chat earlier, they met in public places like parking lots and parks to hand off material at a safe social distance, and set up drop boxes at their programs for learners to pick up and leave material, almost like those little free libraries that we love so much. They also scheduled one-on-one phone sessions where learners and tutors could meet to work through assignments and set up office hours, times when any learner could call in for help. Given the extreme isolation that many learners without internet service faced during quarantine periods, journaling became an especially helpful tool. And talking with literacy program staff and other learners about their experiences became a critical piece of the puzzle, not only for learning, but for a feeling of community and support. Programs built on that support by offering creative writing groups or book clubs that learners could attend both virtually and by phone. Activities that focused on connections to family were also very successful, like group sessions to help learners develop the skills they needed to support their children who were learning from home, or involving the kids directly by offering some family literacy activities. Some programs suggested setting up a calling chain where one learner could reach out to another to check on them. And that person in turn would reach out to another, who would reach out to another. Not only did that increase the sense of connection between learners, but the focus on checking up on the well-being of another was found to be helpful for some isolated learners. Once literacy practitioners supported their learners either online, through a paper-based drop-off system, or over the phone, the need to assess progress became a real issue. Without clear direction on how to administer milestones while keeping their content confidential, challenges with administering complex culminating tasks, and without being able to use some other go-to assessments like camera in a distance format, programs had to work through assessing learner progress creatively. Here are some of the techniques that they shared with us. Some programs sent assessments to learners by mail, having them mail back, drop off, or scan and send the completed assessments using programs like I mentioned earlier, Genius Scan. Recognizing that not seeing the learner work through the assessment means you can't confirm that they didn't get help or have someone else do part of it, other programs administered assessments verbally over the phone. They recommended milestone 14, apparently, for something that works well this way. They also had learners create videos that demonstrated their knowledge or completed assessments on a shared screen during a video call so that the practitioner could monitor them. Several alternative assessments were used during this time as well. Tests or quizzes generated through thatquiz.org, edhelper.com, spelljone.com, and others. Programs also created or modified assessments using programs like Google Forms and suggested that, once again, programs work together to share the assessments they've made so that everyone can benefit. Those programs that were able to open on a limited basis scheduled some learners to come into the program to complete milestones and culminating tasks, even if all their actual learning was done remotely. Partnering with e-channel programs like the Learning Hub offer a great benefit as well, because programs can share the learner, but have their e-channel partner administer the milestone. I'm going to pause here for just a second and check in with Anne-Marie to see if there's anything that we should be addressing in our chat right now.
Sure. A couple more ideas come in. Oops, sorry. You hear me now? Hello. So somebody said that, the circumstances turn some of our preconceived notions on their head. I thought that was an interesting comment. Heather said, we will continue to offer both in-person and online programming post-pandemic to reach the greatest number of clients. So I wonder how many other people are considering that. That would be interesting. Joanna said, online learning created opportunities for some of our learners with limited mobility due to a disability to expand learning. Irregular attendance in class turned to not even missing one class, and even increased learning time with visible accelerated learning progress. These learners now prefer online learning even post-pandemic.
I love that. Thank you so much for mentioning that. That was Joanna, I think I heard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great comment. I think, we have talked a couple times about the sneaky side benefit of some of the awful stuff that we've gone through in the last year. The ability to open up our programs in a more accessible way has been a huge, huge win. So thanks for bringing that up. Okay. So much like the learners that we serve, adult literacy program staff needed and continue to need extra support to navigate this new normal. They may not have an optimal environment for working and teaching from home because of a lack of space or distractions, poor internet service, or even a lack of experience teaching online. Programs shared several excellent suggestions for supporting literacy program staff as they transition to or continue to work from home. One great tip feels a little bit like what we talked about regarding our learners, which is to perform an audit of each staff member's work from home needs and challenges so they can be addressed individually. Part of this review may need to include the cost of upgraded internet service, furniture, office supplies, and ergonomic equipment. Given an employer's responsibility in terms of health and safety, programs urged others to do periodic ergonomics checks when supporting staff with their work from home setup. A quickly thrown together workspace, which is what most of us had, may have been okay for a day or two or even a week, but can cause serious issues when working from home becomes a long-term situation, as clearly it has. Training and professional development are factors to consider during the work from home time period as well. There's a learning curve to not only working remotely, but teaching remotely, keeping learners engaged, using new online programs, maintaining good mental health through all of it. According to the programs we spoke with, professional development was more of a focus near the start of the pandemic than it has been recently. I think we've all gotten into a bit of a groove, and staff have become a bit more comfortable with our new normal. But the need for training certainly continues. It's been offered in a variety of formats, from having staff, board members, and volunteers share their individual expertise to attending live or pre-recorded webinars from other agencies. Popular suggestions for PD to keep on top of included sessions from Contact North, from each of the regional learning networks, and in particular the pop-up PD for Literacy Educators series that's offered through the Learning Networks of Ontario, eChannel, and the Provincial Support Organizations for Literacy. Videos from LinkedIn and YouTube also helped support staff as they grew their skills as well. Programs also told us about taking advantage of tech coaching sessions with Alpha Plus, which really helped them prepare to use technology to its fullest during the transition to online and distance delivery. For more information on the professional development opportunities that are available for your staff, please be sure to download our professional development tip sheet. A link to that will be popped in our chat in just a moment. Another form of support that's had benefits is hosting weekly meetings for staff to share experiences and brainstorm challenges, both personal and professional. It's a way to not only solve common work from home problems, but also keep staff feeling connected and supported. That feeling of connection is a big one. Anyone who works in a caring profession, like adult literacy program staff, need extra support to avoid burnout and compassion fatigue. Helping staff talk about and work through their own fears and challenges during the pandemic gives them the strength to continue helping others. Now, a piece of that to consider is helping staff strike a balance between offering support and resources for learners who are struggling with isolation, anxiety, and stress, and setting boundaries so they can maintain a professional and positive relationship with learners. Supporting learners online, especially when video chat is involved, is a little bit like peeking in someone's window. It can provide access to someone's personal life and circumstances that may be uncomfortable or challenging. So working with staff to discuss boundaries has been a big win for several programs. To help, our friends at Action Read have provided a sample boundaries policy, which you can access through the report Best Practices in Adult Literacy Program Delivery During the COVID-19 Pandemic, We also urge you to review the suggestions and resources in our mental health tip sheet, which will be popped into our chat in just a moment. There are some other policies to consider as well, especially as many workplaces look at reopening on a part-time or full-time basis. A particularly important one is how organizations handle sick days, especially with new variants of the coronavirus showing up in Canada. If a sick day policy isn't in place that provides compensation so staff feel they can stay home if they're unwell, they may come to work anyway. And we've seen what happens when people do. It's really no surprise that policies and procedures come up again when talking about the successful administration of literacy programs during a pandemic. In addition to a thoughtful review of those sick leave policies, program administrators shared some pretty great tips. Consider the policies related to the use of personal computers for work purposes and the inherent risks that can pose. If staff can't bring work computers home, are their home computers secure? Do they have up-to-date security software or firewalls installed? Can confidential learner information be safely accessed or stored on their home computer? This is where the encrypted server we talked about earlier comes in handy. There's a huge element of risk that can be eliminated by storing confidential information securely off-site. Now, ideally, staff could bring home the technology and supplies they needed to work remotely. That also takes some consideration. Program administrators suggested putting procedures in place for removing equipment from the office and returning it later, and also urged others to consider the insurance implications. Check your insurance policy to see if there's any coverage for your equipment if it's taken off-site, and make a plan for what to do if computers get damaged. Don't wait until it happens to decide who's responsible for that damage and any resulting expenses. If funds are available, hiring someone to support the transition to remote work has proved very effective for some programs. For example, someone well-versed in computers can help figure out what's needed to work from home effectively, support staff with their technical issues, and provide training on how to use technology like distance learning software. Another suggestion was bringing in someone to work on digitizing training material that's only available in hard copy right now, either by scanning the material or recreating it in a digital format, like Google Docs or a fillable PDF. It was suggested that with many people laid off as a result of the pandemic, hiring someone with technical skills on a part-time contract basis may be more within reach than it used to be. And it becomes even more reasonable if the cost can be shared between 2 or more organizations. Just as critical as the staff and the administration of a literacy program, as we all know, are its absolutely amazing volunteers. They are often what make one-to-one tutoring programs at all possible, and they need extra support to make a successful transition to an online or remote world too. Many programs shared their struggles with keeping volunteers engaged through COVID-19, particularly those who were less familiar and comfortable with technology, for obvious reasons. What helped was offering volunteer training on how to use digital platforms and how to communicate effectively online. It was recommended that training sessions be offered to both staff and volunteers at the same time, helping ensure that everyone understands the systems and processes being used. Programs that then had staff members launch online tutoring sessions for their volunteers and stay online for a few minutes to provide support to both the learner and the tutor saw particularly good results. Programs that couldn't maintain their original volunteers sought out new opportunities by appealing to people who already had strong digital literacy skills and who may be looking for things to keep them busy during the lockdown. Some even created a volunteer coordinator position to support recruitment and training for new volunteers, either by reallocating staff or by offering a part-time contract position. This may be a great opportunity to support a student placement as well. Now, you may have seen this coming, but if not, For more information about supporting your volunteers, please be sure to download a copy of our Engaging Volunteers tip sheet. As with the others, a link to the tip sheet will be popping up in chat shortly. When the lockdown first eased, some agencies, and we heard you mentioning this in chat, started returning to some face-to-face services, at least at a reduced capacity. Now, many did not, due to the cost or availability of equipment for safe reopening, because of restrictions in the building where their agency is located, or their internal policies and procedures. Those that were able to reopen noted a return of many of the lower level learners who were unable to participate in remote or online learning. And they shared their tips and suggestions for when other programs are ready and able to take that step. The need for physical distancing often meant an entire reorganization of the learning space, starting with measuring the space available and figuring out where furniture, desks, computers, and bookshelves could go to allow for learner seating with the required amount of space. Most programs covered or removed high-touch surfaces like bookshelves and waiting room chairs altogether, propped open doors when they could, so they didn't need to be touched, and installed plexiglass shields between desks. Plexiglass barriers on stands that can be moved as regulations change were particularly appreciated by programs that have used them. And floor stickers indicating walking directions were also well used as well. Cleaning and sanitizing were important, of course, and common purchases included hand sanitizers and dispensers, masks and other PPE for both staff and learners, and sanitizing sprays and wipes. All of this comes at a cost, which, as we mentioned earlier, was prohibitive for many programs. The programs that were able to make these purchases encouraged others to look for funding sources that could be used to help pay for these items, and found it helpful to participate in a bulk buy of some items with partnering agencies. The Ontario Nonprofit Network actually set up a bulk buying process near the start of the pandemic to help with this. Before opening the doors to learners, programs put in place something to outline who and how many people could be on site at one time. For most, this went beyond just a reopening procedure, but involved creating and maintaining a schedule of when every staff person and learner was booked to be on site. It had to be fully accessible and editable remotely. That schedule also needed to include time to clean and sanitize all surfaces between learner appointments as well, not to mention washrooms and other areas that learners may access. The need for this type of scheduling and physical distancing meant programs were simply unable to serve the same number of learners they had in the past. And some learners were still very worried about the health implications of returning to in-person service. Mirroring what secondary schools in the province have done and creating cohorts of learners who could book in-person support only on specific days helped reduce the number of people that a learner could come in contact with and reduced some of the potential risk for programs. There were lots of new protocols put in place for entry to the learning space as well. Programs suggested creating a clearly written online or paper-based self-screening tool that could be shared with learners and staff, and required they submit it before coming on site. Many followed up with a verbal screening as well, and kept copies of the self-screening, screening to demonstrate due diligence. Programs also often blocked their entryway, which allowed staff to do the COVID screening, gather contact tracing information, review safety protocols, and even take temperatures before allowing learners fully on site. Maintaining health and safety was easier for programs that also created learner supply packages, so no one borrowed or shared items like pencils or erasers. They required learners to bring in their own headsets if they needed them, and set aside a designated chair and storage bin for each learner. Some even quarantined learner work for 48 hours before reviewing it. So I'll pause here for a second and say if you've got some other excellent tips and tricks that you can share, we would love to hear them. So I'm going to pass the floor for a quick check to Anne-Marie.
So since we last checked in, Sarah Stalker posted the 2021 e-channel referral guide. It's there as a PDF and available to download. Heather said, we are considering to offer some virtual options when we return to in-person. We noticed increased attendance as well. Money for bus tickets, weather, commute times, etc., are not an issue virtually. So it's interesting now that we're looking forward to maybe a more positive future, that people are stopping to sort of see where their program is going to lie in the future. I think that's great. Lisa said, I'd like to see LinkedIn Learning free for all LBS practitioners and volunteers. Yes, we would like to see that free as well. Maureen said, these are all good suggestions. We've also found these work. Monthly e-letter with tips and fun stuff, monthly online support meeting, and get together regular sending of online materials. Dee said, we offered online Zoom training to our volunteer tutors so they could set up one-to-one sessions with their learners, and it was very well received. So thank you for sharing all your tips and lessons learned, everybody. That's all great information for us to have.
That's fabulous. Thank you. I would speak to one piece in particular. You were mentioning LinkedIn Learning. Totally agree. I can't tell you that it's at every library, but many libraries, public libraries, will allow access to some of that content for free if you have a library card. So I strongly encourage you to check with your local public library and see if they have that arrangement, because many of them do, and that can open up a whole new world of extra professional development and training material that isn't going to incur any kind of cost. Okay. So obviously we have been learning a lot, and thank you again for sharing things that you've learned as well during this time of global crisis. The programs that we spoke to stressed the need for all of us to not only keep sharing as we learn, but also use it to plan for the future of adult literacy programming in Ontario. This may, and I hate to say it, not be the last health crisis we see in our lifetimes. So being proactively prepared for future lockdowns or office closures is critical. Some of the practices we've developed to deal with COVID-19, as you've been saying, are actually really beneficial. They've removed barriers to attendance. They've expanded the ways in which we can reach the learners we serve. And when we plan for the future, keeping those practices in place is a win for all involved. And it's now that we need to start thinking about these things and what we want to take forward, not when there's another emergency that we need to contend with. So to prepare for what we hope doesn't happen, but potential future lockdowns or closures, programs suggested creating a grab and go kit of essential paperwork, USB sticks, physical supplies, and digital resources that can be quickly transitioned from office to home. It reminds me very much of the emergency kits that the government would often tell you should have in your basement, 2 days worth of clean drinking water and things like that, extra batteries, that sort of thing. So an emergency just in case kit. Having digital resources stored online in a location that can be accessed from both work and home will make putting that kind of grab and go kit together a whole lot easier. G Suite for Nonprofits is an excellent resource for those considering the move to cloud-based remote access storage and communications. To make the transition to remote work and service delivery in the future, programs also suggested having a tested and reliable virtual meeting platform that's just a normal part of the suite of things that you use every day. And we have been recently. It's also important for programs to have up-to-date policies and contingency plans in place ahead of time that address things like switching from in-person to online or remote learning, succession planning for key staff roles, and as we mentioned earlier, potential sick days or leaves. To help, in the next month, our organization, Literacy Link South Central, will be releasing a pandemic planning manual. It will be available using the link on your screen and will include lots of information about emergency and closure preparedness, along with fill-in-the-blank policy templates that you can just take and use. Probably about a month, we should see it up and out in the public. So curriculum development must now be done considering not only in-person delivery, but remote, online, and blended formats, something that will take additional time and work to accomplish. Literacy practitioners would benefit from professional development now around learning online and how it differs from in person. So both curriculum development and delivery can be done effectively in the future. When we consider working with learners in multiple formats and across multiple platforms, we must also consider the impact of stress on people's ability to learn. As we've seen clearly during the pandemic, there is an impact on learner concentration, motivation, focus, and not just learners, it's all of us. Planning for the future may need to include embedded motivational and engagement techniques and shorter, more bite-sized learning opportunities instead of larger courses. Learning online does not come naturally to a lot of people. So it becomes one of our standard ways of delivering service. We're going to need to help learners prepare for that. They would benefit from the creation of some sort of introduction to online learning, what one program called a boot camp on how to be an online learner. It could include an overview of the kinds of skills needed to learn online, common words and phrases they may encounter, and how to find reliable information online or in the digital tools they'll be using. Creating walkthrough videos demonstrating how to use meeting software and platforms, how to download a document, how to complete an online form, or submit assignments. Creating those in advance would make this boot camp valuable for many future online learners and could be developed in partnership with other programs using the same types of platforms. Some of what will help Ontario's adult literacy programs maintain service delivery during a future crisis is support and direction from the Ministry of Labour Training and Skills Development. Programs suggested working with the funder to establish a playbook or set of approved directions for shifting from in-person to remote delivery. Ideally, this plan would include a commitment to the funding necessary for PPE and supplies, technology, and curriculum, official direction on the remote administration of milestones and gathering of confidential client information and signature, and recognition for the impact that a global health crisis has on learner attendance, which includes the need for adjusted targets as a result of lockdown. Programs offered many more suggestions for the strengthening of their relationship with the ministry, all of which can be found in that report. Even with this move to remote and online learning, the need for in-person service delivery has not gone away, and it will remain should this type of crisis happen again. With that in mind, finding new ways to support learners, especially those with lower literacy skills or who have limited or no access to technology and internet service, would be useful now. Consider what you wish you had in place to support those learners now, and begin the process of figuring out how to make it happen so that fewer people are left behind in the event of a future crisis. Frankly, this is something that the adult literacy field cannot tackle alone, as one of the critical things this pandemic brought to light is how poverty and the digital divide combine to prevent access to valid and reliable information, services, and resources. It will take a coordinated effort from government, social services, nonprofits, and communities to address the needs of the disadvantaged and even the playing field before another crisis happens. As I said earlier, there have been some practices developed during this crisis that may be beneficial to keep in place, even when we return to whatever our new normal will be. While some programs may not have considered originally working or delivering remotely, they can now incorporate it into their menu of services, as you've told us you probably will be, opening up opportunities for learner attendance that they may not have been able to achieve before. The number of different ways that programs have been communicating with learners can continue as well, keeping lines of communication open that weren't there before. There can be a cost and time savings to remote work as well, if the work from home environment is set up in a way that allows it. Much like our learners, some staff may not find it easy or productive to work from home, but it's possible that others who are currently working from home would prefer to continue doing so on at least a part-time basis if the opportunity is available. Throughout our conversations with the literacy programs, one common message we heard was the need to learn from what's happened this year and proactively plan for a future based on what we know now. We hope that the information they shared resonated with those of you who joined us today, and that you found several suggestions you'll be able to use for your own programs and current processes and your future planning. As a reminder, today's webinar provided a look into the information we gathered by speaking with literacy programs from across the province through a combination of 39 surveys and 23 interviews. Again, we thank those programs for sharing their knowledge and experience, and remind you that more information is available in the full research report. This is the last time I'm going to say it, called Best Practices in Adult Literacy Program Delivery During the COVID-19 Pandemic, which is available on the Quill website, along with the tip sheets that we mentioned. And not too long from now, also, there will be a recording of this webinar, which we're running 3 times this week. So before we wrap up and say thank you and enjoy the rest of your day a little bit early, I will check in with Anne-Marie and see if we have any questions or comments in the chat, and then open the floor.
Okay, there's just a couple of more comments to go here. Robert's seeking some support with a resource. He said, when appropriate, can someone share any links to online tools in which learners can answer graphing and measurement questions properly? I have some PDF file assignments that require learners to create graphs and measure using a ruler, which won't measure the same as on a computer screen as in real life. I see that Sarah responded a little ways down, and she said, Robert, if helpful to you, the Learning Hub offers a functions and graph course available at any time. And I'm also going to ask Robert if you feel comfortable doing so to put your email address in the chat. And then anybody else who has ideas could actually reach out to him afterwards too, because once the Zoom session's done, the chat session goes with us as well. So if you don't have ideas now, then please, Robert, if you feel comfortable putting in your email address, somebody can grab it and get to you soon afterwards. Lisa said that the pandemic planning manual also needs to include what to do in an emergency in your virtual classroom. I think that's a really interesting kind of statement. Thinking about what kinds of emergencies can happen in a virtual classroom, and maybe that's something that we want to just chat about. And Barb said, it's great that we have some positive and wins related to remote delivery that we've undertaken during the pandemic. So many innovative and effective approaches. It will be interesting to see how the ministry views our in-person LBS programs continuing with online remote delivery post-pandemic. It's a very interesting statement for sure. Currently, the 5 LBS e-channel fully online programs are funded at less than half the cost per learner compared to the face-to-face LBS programs, and have comparatively larger learner-served targets because of online delivery. That is a really interesting statement, because what we've heard so much is that it takes so much effort to help somebody when they're learning online, especially for the first time. So that's going to be an interesting conversation with our ministry going forward for sure. Robert has posted his email address there if you need it. And Lisa clarified what kinds of virtual emergencies could happen. She said suicide threat or a medical emergency. So if you're in class or online with somebody and one of those things or something else, you know, somebody being triggered by some information they're hearing about or having some kind of crisis, I guess it's great to have a plan in place to see how you or the staff that you work with would respond to those situations. And that's it for that.
That's great, thank you. I know that organizations who regularly work online or on the phone with people who are in crisis have policies in place. So it'd be interesting to take a look at what is available and shareable from outside of the LBS field, but still within sort of the guise of nonprofit. Conveniently, that pandemic planning manual was not just focused on LBS. It was actually all small and medium-sized nonprofits across the province. So it is possible that some of the folks that our team talked to put the pandemic planning manual together may end up with information about that. So thank you for putting that in chat. We'll follow up for sure. So what I think I will do is go ahead and stop sharing my screen now, and we'll allow you guys to just chat. We'd love to hear your thoughts. This is a wonderful opportunity for us to collaboratively share more ideas. So if we open up the floor and you have questions for your peers who are on the call today, that would be fabulous for you to go ahead and share them. And let's brainstorm some other best practices that you've developed during this pandemic.